Now on to our main event. So,
Okay, let's go.
So you messaged me yesterday, the day before.
Yes,
No,
I did.
yesterday, in fact. And you
Yes, I
said,
did.
I want to talk about this. I've got an idea for a top five. I want to go in depth with it, which is perfect for me and all the listeners and viewers out there as well, I hope. So we've talked about how to be a bookie. What to talk about how to be a booker first. We've discussed the idea that, hey, anyone can be a booker. All you need
Yes.
is just a couple of ideas. But what most people who are inexperienced will do is, let's say, for example, Guy A will beat up Guy B with whatever.
Yep.
Okay?
That's an angle.
That's an angle.
That's an angle.
Then week two, what inevitably happens is then Guy B gets the
B.
revenge on Guy A.
Yeah.
And
Now
then
you're
you're
back
50-50, yeah.
Yeah, you're back where you started.
Okay, well,
Then-
how do you
then
be
you
a
have a
booker and
match.
be good at it then?
Because you got to study it. And I've said it. I said it in this one. You got to. Let's take that same scenario you laid out. Guy B hits Guy A or something and lays him out. And the second week, Guy A is going to try to come in and hit Guy B with a 2x4 or whatever he got hit with. But yet, Guy B sees it coming and says, whoop, nope, and he leaves. He's a chicken shit. Now that at least continues the story. He hasn't made, he hasn't got payback for it. And then put them in a match and they fight out and they steadily build. And then you take it to probably a cage match, but you got to have a winner. But in having a winner, what I usually did, I would have the guy come back in 2 weeks, the loser, and kind of inject himself back in the guy's business. Or if he's got a tag team, inject himself in that business. So the story finishes, but it doesn't finish. It can, because the fans don't forget. So, yeah. Can you be a booker? Yes. Anybody can be a booker, just by what we're saying right there. You can be a booker. But being a successful booker takes a lot of study, and you got to understand what you're trying to do. See, I was lucky in my career that I used to ride with actually a lot of bookers. And they would tell me not necessarily how they did it, but how to do it and their ideas. And if you just, but see, people today, they don't have that. They don't have that pleasure. They don't have that opportunity to ride with people who have actually booked before. And they called it sitting under the learning tree. Well, I sat under it a lot of times with, guys who really drew a lot of money and their angles made sense, drew a lot of money. Of course, they didn't draw the money that their WWE's drawing now. They didn't have pay-per-view, but they did draw sellouts in these 10 or 12,000 seat arenas. They drew, and you could feel that the heat, if they had just expanded this a little bit, you can imagine how big their business could have been if they'd had pay-per-view. But there's different ways to do it. Some guys will tell you, and some guys don't want to talk about it, but get it where you could. And I made good use of my days traveling with these people to just pick their brain, and they would tell me. So it's, you either understand it or you don't. Some people understand it almost automatically. Let me tell a story about Eddie Gilbert. Eddie Gilbert wanted to be a booker so badly because his father was a wrestler, Tommy Gilbert, and his brother became a wrestler, his younger brother, Doug Gilbert, and they were like from a wrestling family. And he wanted to, I first met him when he was about probably 16. He would come to Memphis with his father, Tommy, and he'd bring a camera with him, like Cornette, and he would take backstage pictures of the wrestlers. But I didn't know it at the time, but he was trying to break into wrestling. I never heard that. And he was a good kid. I always liked him. And on his high school graduation, I think instead of going to his high school graduation, He actually went to a show in Jonesboro, Arkansas. He skipped his high school graduation to go and wrestle on a show. And then right after that, he worked in Memphis for about a couple of weeks. Then he went to Oklahoma. And I was talking to him one day. I said, when did you want to start being a booker? And he said, listen, this is what he used to do. He used to write phantom cards out. And he would say, and he would figure it all out, how long they need to go and who needs to go and what he was going to do the second week. He actually taught himself how to book. And he had a hero in Memphis. It was Jerry Lawler. And I used to love to watch Eddie work because he had two heroes, Jerry Lawler and Terry Funk. So I used to take, not bets, but I used to say, I wonder who he'll be tonight. I was on the show with him. And one night I'd be watching him in the back. Well, he's Jerry Lawler. That's who he's chosen to be in this particular match. And the next night I'm watching him and he's Terry Funk. So he had two heroes, Terry Funk and Jerry Lawler, and actually did them quite well. So, but he had some ideas about wrestling, and they were good. But I think what happened to Eddie is he was very impatient. He wanted the sellouts right away, and when he didn't get the sellouts, I think it kind of depressed him. And yeah, and we all know what happened to him in Puerto Rico. That I was leaving, going to WWF, and Carlos said, "Who could we get to book?" I said, "I don't know." He said, "What about Eddie?" I said, "Yeah, that'd be a good choice." He said, "Will you call him?" I said, "No, I'm not calling him. You can call him, but I'm not calling him." And so he called him, and then about 2 weeks later, right before I left, he came in. And then it was only about 3 weeks after I'd left Puerto Rico that I heard that Eddie Gilbert had died. So, and a lot of people said it was a heart attack. A lot of people said it was some pills that he'd been taking. But they found him in his room like 2 days later. He lived in a hotel room, and they found him. He was dead in there. So, but good guy. And I miss him every day. Love his brother, Doug, loved his father, had a nice mother. I met them all. But sometimes you want to be something till you get it, then you have it. Now what you're going to do with it. And I don't think a heart attack didn't kill Eddie. I don't think taking pills killed Eddie. I think the rest of the business kind of killed Eddie, because I think he loved it too much. Now that turned into a story about Eddie Gilbert, but I've seen guys like that because they love the business that much.
Before we get onto your list of greatest bookers, is there any booker out there who you thought was terrible but had significant tenure as a booker, who just kept getting hired or employed?
Well, I'm trying to think. No, once they're kind of, the word gets out that they're not very good, they don't continually get hired unless they just stay in the same territory and maybe own it or own a piece of it. Kansas City, they had, I don't even know who the booker in Kansas City was, Bob Geigel or Pat O'Connor. They were terrible. They were terrible bookers, good guys, but they didn't draw any money and had no ideas.
Okay, so I was just looking at who the booker was. On Pro Wrestling Stories, it says that, I think that's right, Brown worked as a booker for Central States Wrestling. So yeah, yep. Bob Brown, your favorite.
Terrible. Terrible.
We shall move on then. So before we get to the top 5, you have some honourable mentions you'd like to bring up. So not only tell us the name of the person, but could you give us maybe some of their best ideas or their style of booking as well?
Well, most of my bookers will be from down south. And I would say one of the best bookers that taught me a lot about booking was Tom Ernesto. He was one half of the mass team, the Assassins, and they drew a ton of money in the Carolinas and drew a ton of money in Florida and Georgia. They were really, really, he really understood human nature, and he really knew how to work his gimmick. So, and of course, he would book himself. They were the top heels, and they should have been, because when you watch those guys work, even on their interviews, they never raised their voices. And Tom was a great talker, and Jody Hamilton too. They were great talkers. And so when they talked and the camera came in on that mask, you believed them. So there was no bullshit about these guys. So I think he's not probably top 5, but he's definitely top 10. Honorable mention anyway. I'll say another one. I can't remember his name now. Buck
Robley
was a good booker, because he booked in Oklahoma for Bill Watts and had a hell of a run, because he understood kind of the territory, and his style was just wide open anyway. Plus, he had a baby face there that was over like a son of a bitch, was Junkyard Dog. So all he had to do was keep throwing those heels like Jake the Snake and Teddy DiBiase. And, you got to look at his talent level. He had a lot of talent there that he could just keep throwing. And of course, Watts was a pretty good booker. So between Buck and Watts together, they had a good team.
Was Ernie Ladd a booker as well at the time you were there?
Ernie Ladd was there too, but Ernie booked mostly around himself. And I don't think he was a great guy. I loved Ernie, but he wasn't really that good with. See, a booker has to be good with the whole card. See, a lot of bookers are just good with their stuff. So, but Ernie Ladd was a booker there, and I think Watts, he owned it and he booked it too.
So, any more, or should we go to number 5?
Let's go to number 5. Let's see who I had here.
Okay.
I wrote them down. Okay, you don't remember this, but this is a lifetime ago. George Scott, who was the booker for Mid-Atlantic territory. He hit a run that they were selling out everywhere. They used to do the double Saturdays and the double Sundays. Matinee shows, and they would say they would do 10,000 people in Asheville, and they get in the car and they would go to Charlotte and they do 12,000 there. So you were working a lot, but you were making money, and because he understood and he treated it, and he told these stories. Plus he had Johnny Valentine, he had Wahoo McDaniel, and he had George Becker, Johnny Weaver, the Assassins at one point. So he had a lot of guys there. He could put it around. He did no angles underneath. Say before the 4th match, it was just matches. So when he sent the last 2 matches out there, those were your money matches. That's where he spent the time. So, but I would give him number 5, one of the best bookers I've ever seen. Mm-hmm. Number 4, I'm going to go with, and who'd I have here? I'm going to go with Jerry Lawler. Jerry Lawler had an unusual booking establishment. The first thing routine. First of all, his main booking key was Channel 5 in Memphis. It drew such ratings that it was almost equal to prime time. Now, this is years ago. They would do in the 20s like somebody does now. They do a 3 rating. Oh my God, it's like, it's the end of the world. But back then, that was a prime time rating. Dallas was getting a 20. If anybody remembers that show, Dallas, it was the top show on TV for years. And the show that come on at 11 o'clock on Saturday morning would do a 20. And it was the same rating, same number of people. And he did a lot of stupid, goofy stuff, but he built most of it around him and then did a good job with the rest of the card. And yeah, he was a smart guy. He really was. I'm going to give him number 4. Number 3, I'm going to give to Jarrett. He's another one in Memphis because I think Lawler learned his booking more or less from Jarrett. And Jarrett, they all have their own unique style, but he drew a lot of money and he drew it with personal angles, and his stuff was really good. Now, Memphis they weren't afraid to bring somebody in. So when Lawler, he would run out of heels. He was the resident babyface. But when he ran out of heels, he would import heels for 2 or 3 weeks. He would import Terry Funk. He would import maybe Bruiser Brody for 3 weeks, or he'd find him. He was like the shining prince out in the desert with the shining gold sword. But if he didn't have anybody to do battle with, if he didn't have that big dragon, and sometimes he'd have to get him a dragon, bring him in to give him time to get the guys in the territory over. And that's why they kept, see, a guy could start an angle in Memphis at, say, January, and I could almost tell you to the week how long that they would actually run with him as a top heel. It'd be about 8 months. And by that time, he was worn out, and they didn't like to do repeats. I don't blame them, because by the time he got through with Lawler, of course, he'd already beaten the underneath baby faces. He'd already beaten Dundee, and he already beat, me and some of the other ones. But we made that heel like he was breathing fire. So when he got to Lawler, yeah, he was, and Jarrett was a master of that. So I'll give him number 3.
Why does Jarrett then get the nod over Lawler then? What? Because
he did it. Well, I think he understood it. See, Lawler only booked during the winter. Winter and summer. You know why?
Sports fan.
Yeah, he's a football fan. He didn't want to be bothered with damn wrestling when football season was going on. And he told me that. He said, "No, I got to go watch Cleveland Browns." He's a big Cleveland Browns fan. So, and then he would turn it back over to Jerry. But I've seen it so hot, usually this is back in the day, when September come around, business went down because that's when the kids went back to school, and they expected it every year, except about 2 years. I remember in Memphis, we went through September like it wasn't even there. I mean, it was so hot. And I don't think anybody was staying up late at night just thinking of things to do. It just one of those times that everything just comes together and it kind of books itself. And when you have talent, I mean, good talent, that happens. Okay, number 2. I'm going to give you one, Ron Fuller, that booked Continental Wrestling. It started out in Alabama and moved to Knoxville. And Ron was a basketball star at Clemson, my favorite university. And his dad, Buddy Fuller, was from the Welch family in Tennessee. They brought pro wrestling to Tennessee. And he had actually watched all these years, and he was a big wrestling fan too, but he knew how to book it. And he was the type of guy when you go in there and Ron was really, really friendly. And he said, well, Dutch, come on in here and sit down. Hey, man, how you doing? Hey, you want something to drink? This, that, and the other. He said, hey, I got this idea. I want you to listen to this. I want you to help me with it now. Blah, 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 pass it back. And then I'm going to do this. Then I'm going to do that. And you're sitting there listening to him and you're going, you get caught up in the cadence of it. Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. You like it? I love it. Yeah. And you forget that he tells you that he just wants you to get beat by this guy, but he's got you so excited that you're willing to go out there and do anything. But he actually took the Knoxville territory and ended up, I think he bought it for like $100,000, I think, and ended up settling it to another guy for like $1 million. So that was a pretty good return. So
it's not the only time he did it, I think, either. I think he may have done it a couple of times.
Yeah, well, that was his dad. He did it a couple of times. His dad, Buddy, had been through all this anyway. So, and he was well versed on what he had to do. Good guy.
So what was the thing he did? So just very quickly before we get into number one, is he would basically hotshot the territory for a month. Then he'd sell it. And then there's no way that the new guy could follow up.
He wouldn't hotshot it. He'd get it up and running. He'd get it up and running in good shape, and he'd make money off of it as long as it could. And then when it was coming time, if he found a buyer, well, he wanted to sell it while it was still hot. Of course, the buyer knew nothing about pro wrestling. And Ron didn't tell him either. He just got his money and he went on down the highway. And the first time I remember when he sold Knoxville, he wanted to get a hockey team. And he came up with music for the hockey guys. And then they took it over to wrestling. Because when he lined up, he'd turn the lights down and they'd play the music. It's time for the game to start. Then, and starting at right wing for Nashville from Toronto, Canada, Troy, whatever. And he'd come out and then the spotlights on him. And he had spotlights all over the arena. He made it exciting from the opening bell. And finally, the Eastern Hockey League, then the National Hockey League saw what he's doing it, and then they adopted it. They told him first he couldn't play music. He said, why not? He said, you what's that movie? There's no crying in baseball. Remember that? He said, there's no music in hockey. He said, well, I don't know why. There's music here. And then they was going to come to tell him, 2 lawyers they sent, tell him he couldn't do it. And they went out and watched it, and they come back and they said, well, I guess you do. Mm-hmm. and they enjoyed it. So, but I would say that he's a great head for wrestling. And he's the second one.
Can I guess who the first one is?
Guess.
I was thinking of various different people. I was thinking, are you going to say like Pat Patterson or someone in Puerto Rico or something like that? And then I remembered.
No.
I think it's Eddie Graham.
No, but I should have put him in.
You're kidding. I genuinely thought I got that right. So it wasn't Eddie Graham?
No.
Oh, okay.
And I actually forgot Eddie, but Eddie, he's another honorable mention.
Well, there you go. I've got absolutely no idea who you're going to say now.
Yeah. I'm going to say it's not just one guy. It's about 10 guys. And where would 10 guys be used to book something?
In a committee or a writers' meeting.
Right. WWE. And I think since Triple H is ahead of that, I think he's got to be the number one booker. Not just him, but they're giving him all these ideas, but he knows how to place them, or the creative team does. And we were just talking earlier about the ending segment on SmackDown. Was that on SmackDown where they busted up? And how good it was. So I think Triple H with those 10 writers, which actually are semi-bookers, really. And but I don't know who actually books the actual shows. I don't really know who does that. But I guess somebody, and it's got to go to Triple H for his clearance. But
Well,
I would give it to him.
Yeah, Raw has their own head writer. SmackDown has their own head writer. They both got teams under them, and then I imagine Triple H is the head honcho who approves everything or suggests his own stuff. But also, there's going to be people like Paul Heyman who is going to be trusted to come up with his own stuff as well. So it really is a melting pot of ideas.
Well, I don't think. I think he comes up with his own stuff, but I think he's also they keep him around because he knows what he's doing, and they run the idea past him, and then he adjusts accordingly because he had that ECW one time, and here's the story about Paul Heyman. I think he was getting ready to buy into Philadelphia, but he came to Memphis as a manager, and Eddie Gilbert was there, and they ended up, I heard, pretty good friends. But he came to Memphis to check out the style in Memphis, and he came down there and he learned the style. And what he did, he took that style back to Philadelphia, which was a virgin territory, if you want to call it a territory. It was a virgin city for Memphis wrestling. They were used to the old WWF style, the big 6'4", 260-pound heels. It moved slow, and they didn't have a lot of action. So when he saw Memphis, he said, "Wow, these guys are moving." And we're running each other around the ring, and it was much faster, much more entertaining. And he copied that idea, took it back to Philadelphia, and then he turned it into, that crazy hardcore style that ECW was known for.
Yeah, well, at the time, Eastern Championship Wrestling is an interesting beast in the sense that WCW was going there. The Philly crowd has always been difficult. They weren't fans of a lot of stuff they were doing. They were with other stuff, of course. WWF, the same thing. And then there was a guy called Joel Goodhart who ended up running about once a month in the area. But the thing was, he was essentially a money mark. He was overspending, bringing everybody he could possibly bring in, from Abdullah the Butcher to Cactus Jack to Owen Hart, just anyone he could do to fill in. And also had a lot of young guys like Sabu and the Sandman and stuff who would go to Eastern Championship Wrestling. So ECW and Eastern Championship Wrestling, when it first came out, was really a bar wrestling outfit, like indie kind of thing. So, and they get the occasional WWF guy like King Kong Bundy or Jim Neidhart and Don Morocco. How could I forget Don Morocco and Tito Santana? And then they built it with Shane Douglas and stuff like that over the course of the time. And then they found their own footing.
But he built it with TV.
Well, do you know, really, they actually built it more than anything else through word of mouth and the newsletters, which Eddie Gilbert had an in with Dave Meltzer. And Eddie Gilbert told Dave Meltzer to start covering Eastern Championship Wrestling. And that's how, at least with the tape traders and those inside fans at the time, that's how ECW popularity grew.
Well, it grew, and because those Philadelphia fans are different, really, really different. I went out on the crowd in Philadelphia with WWE, WWF. They're brutal. I go out there, look out here, you piece of... I just walked out there and said, "I ain't done nothing. Yeah, you need to get over." Oh, they were brutal. So,
very, very briefly, was there anyone in TNA where you worked in a creative capacity for a good 6 years or so? Was there anybody there who you would give an honourable mention to as far as actually being a good booker, whether their ideas were listened to or not?
Well, Vince Russo. I didn't listen to him. But I will say one thing. Vince, at least he'd work every day. And he may not have had great ideas, but he always had one. And a lot of people said, "Oh, that sucks." Well, you might take a sucky idea and turn it into something. And even Jeff was pretty good at coming up with ideas. Jeff Jarrett.
if we said on this list that because you mentioned Triple H and then all the people under him, that is number one, what if we said Jerry Jarrett and Jerry Lawler combined because they basically tag teamed the Memphis territory and booked relatively similarly, even though, Lawler's booking was a bit more silly? That would open up spot 5. George Scott would bump up to 4th place. So if there was a 5th place that you could put in, who would it be?
Eddie Graham.
Yeah.
I'd put Eddie Graham in there.